I would like to start by saying thank you for being here, genuinely. It is both an honor and a deeply humbling experience to perform my first keynote in such a historic city and in the company of people forgiving enough to excuse the fact I'll be doing an entire keynote in the wrong language. Because I believe the story matters more than the storyteller, and because introductions embarrass me, I'm going to skip past the bit where I tell you why you need to listen to me. And I'm going to tell you a story instead. Imagine being 25 years old and Malaysian. You have only traveled out of Asia twice, both times with your family. You're alone in America, and you have no idea how to pronounce half the words in your vocabulary. But you don't know that's a problem yet. You go for meetings. You talk to everyone you meet. Every time you open your mouth, people smile indulgently. And there is a look you start to recognize. The same look you've seen used to reward a puppy after it does a trick. And slowly you realize why you keep receiving that look. Hollywood tells us that accents like this are funny, that it belongs to the man who does your laundry, to the man who sells fried rice, the woman who says love you a long time. So you get rid of it. You smooth out the vowels. Work hard to stop sounding like this when you try to talk to people. You sharpen your voice into a weapon, and then you learn how to make it flex. You start learning the nuances, the contours of every accent you hear, and you never quite get it right. When people ask you where is home, you tell them airports and all over, or just wherever work takes me. After 6 months, you learn that people like you best when they think you're just about local, but also a little bit foreign. You learn that the world is made of stories, big and small, that we're layers upon layers of narratives. You realize the reason people look down upon your original accent, your fresh off the boat, oh, she's so Asian accent. It's because Hollywood told them the wrong kind of stories. But that's not the most important thing you learn. The most important thing you learn is that the world belongs to the ones who know how to make it listen. That's why the trickster gods of old mythology were always storytellers. Anansi and Loki and Coyote and all the rest of them. They understood that if you know the right way to tell a story, you can make the universe sing whatever damn tune you tell it to. I've been on the road for about a decade now. Every few months, I'm in a new country, a new continent. And every time, I find myself learning something new. One of the most profound things I discovered in the last 10 years is I didn't know what silence sounded like until my first proper night in Sweden. I remember that moment vividly. I was walking down the street with my ex, staring up at a sky that was darker than I understood, dumbstruck by the fact that the world felt like it was a size too tight, and there were places where the sun sometimes goes down at 9 in the evening before coming right up at 2. But I digress. It's so dark, I whispered to him. My ex stared at me in confusion. It's night? And it's so quiet. Why is it so quiet? He looked around us, puzzled. It was 11 o'clock on a weekday, and we lived in a small, sleepy Swedish town. As such, it was doing what it has always done at this hour, going to bed like a good, small, sleepy Swedish town. So after a moment, my ex replied, because it's night? Almost a year later, I went home to Malaysia. It was about 11 o'clock on a weekday, and Kuala Lumpur was doing what it always does at that hour. sitting down with a cup of hot Milo, a plate of fried noodles. I looked up at the sky then and I went, oh. I realized why I had been confused so many months ago. You see, oh God, the sky in Malaysia never darkens. It is instead the shade of orangey indigo, its city line hemmed with a soft glow. More importantly, it is never quiet there. A tropical country lives and dies by the strength of its air conditioning. And virtually every home in Kuala Lumpur had a unit murmuring quietly outside of its walls. That was my idea of silence. I didn't know it could be something different, because different did not exist in my life. Wrapped up in the cosmopolitan bubble of Kuala Lumpur, I didn't know to miss it, didn't know to look for it. The story in my head, my personal narrative, said that silence was a low hum. So I carried that thought around with me for years, even though it was completely, utterly wrong. My experiences had taught me a story, and I bought it, lock, stock, and barrel. The incident reminds me of a parable that American author David Foster Wallace related to a graduating class in Kenyon College, Ohio. He said, there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, morning, boys, how's the water? And the two young fish swim on for a bit. And then eventually one of them looks over and he goes, what the hell is water? We are, each of us, immersed in our own sense of normalcy, our own ideas of what is ordinary, what is natural. There are a few commonalities of understanding that we share with the global subconscious. We know that the sun comes up from the east. We know gravity tethers us to the ground, that we'll all die someday. And if we don't work, we don't eat. But the rest, we don't think about it. And even when we do, we rarely internalize truths that we ourselves have not lived. If I tell you back home, there are ethnic groups who greet each other with the phrase, have you eaten yet? That they mean such greetings with complete sincerity that it will immediately feed you if you say no. You'd probably not. You'll accept that this is a possibility, that it is entirely acceptable to have a place where food isn't just a necessity or even a pleasure, but a thing of almost spiritual importance. Well, you'll probably think it's a bit odd, a little out of place, almost a bit surreal, because that isn't part of your story, and what exists outside our personal narrative is wrong. In that same speech, a speech that has become responsible for informing so many narratives regarding speeches, Wallace digs a little further into this. He talks about how he's, on some deep and primal level, convinced that he's the center of the universe. How is the same for all of us? We rarely talk about this sort of natural, basic self-centeredness because it is so socially repulsive. Yet it is. But it's pretty much the same for all of us deep down. It is our default setting, hardwired into our boards at birth. Think about it. There is no experience you've had that you were not the absolute center of. The world as you experience it is right there in front of you, or behind you, or to the left or to the right of you, on your TV or your monitor, or whatever. Other people's thoughts and feelings have to be communicated with you somehow, but your own are so immediate, so intense, so urgent, so real. It is an effect that extends to our social circles. Whether we mean to or not, We define our existence by the people we meet, the routines we follow. Although we understand intellectually that there are billions of people in the world, we rarely see more than a few. Hi.
Sorry.
Bye. I have completely lost my train of thought. Give me a second. We rarely see more than a few hundred a week. As such, we find ourselves influenced by the paradigms in this enclosure, endlessly shaped by and shaping those ideologies, driven to find an acceptable median. We end up taking things for granted, forever aware that the world as a concept is bigger than we think, but always and forever diminished by our own set of behaviors. Travel breaks that. Not travel like the kind your grandparents might insist on, curated by a smiling guide every hour given an itinerary of its own. Not travel like a gap year, where you know you have a home to go to. Not travel like you save up for $10 at a time, counting down the days until you get on a plane and blow all that money on an annual bacano. But travel like you never plan to stop. Like you don't know how to stop, if you can stop. Like all the dogs of hell and the ghosts of childhood trauma are hunting you across the airports of the world. Travel like everything you have ever owned could be stored in 2 bags. And going to another country feels like packing for a trip across the city. Travel like that teaches you a whole hell of a lot of things. It teaches you how to listen for the stories that fill the world, how to make space for them between your ribs. It shows you the rhythm of each city you visit, the issues and disparities between countries. Tokyo is a machine. London lies about how much it really likes you. Portland's underrated. And New York? The first time I went to New York, I expected something cold. Glass and unsmiling faces, subways that screamed all hours of the day, no heart under all that razzle-dazzle. But what I found was a streetwise, slang-slinging, no-nonsense soul that's always 20 minutes late to its next appointment. It will still take 2 minutes to tell you where you need to go. Just don't waste his time. Most of all, though, travel teaches you about how small you are. It decenters you from the fear that everyone is looking, that your failures go on forever, reminds you that you are just another person in 7 billion. And good or bad, you're only here for a little while. So why waste all that time on other people's expectations? It is the same with stories, the way you tell them. Travel teaches you there is no time to waste trying to tell stories by someone else's rules. But enough of that for a little while. Let's talk about practical advice. Let's talk about making this hypothetical idea work. Particularly, why you shouldn't do things as I did, and how, if someone like me managed it, you're statistically likely to do better. See, when I was 22, I asked a friend to hang onto my ankles so I could swing myself over the edge of a helipad. My rationale for doing so was a ridiculous one. I wanted a better view. A coworker had snuck us up on the roof, and I decided, not unjustly, that I would never again have the opportunity to see Kuala Lumpur from that specific angle, 36 stories off the ground. And as such, I needed to take complete advantage of the situation. So I told my friend to be certain not to drop me, and then hung in the air for about 20 seconds, delighted in the sight, And in fact, I have no particular fear of heights. I haven't really changed. And if you ask anyone who knows me, they'll tell you I'm probably worse these days. While certain traits have improved over the years, others remain grimly entrenched. My response to potentially fatal, but nonetheless entertaining, opportunities remains, sure, why not? Travel so frequently romanticized as a surrender of worldly obligations, a giant fuck you to the rigors of structure and sets, should have been a terrible idea for someone like me. And in a big way, it was. I have booked flights for the wrong day, forgotten luggage, pounded down the corridor screaming, "Oh God, please stop," as an air stewardess slowly pulled the door shut. But even bullheaded idiots can learn. If you're concerned, this is where I sell you a line on working smarter, not harder, or expound on the virtues of another productivity app. You'd be half right. What I want to sell you isn't advice on finding your bliss, but perhaps something more grim. What are you afraid of? What frightens you? What scares you more than anything else? For me, it was the terror of wasting a life that I would never get back. I subscribe to the belief that even if there was a God, even if there was reincarnation and afterlife, the you that exists today is finite. And if you let fear hold you back, you'll never get that chance again. Which is how 10 years ago, I took my life savings, a meager $25,000, and traveled to America because I wanted to make my mark. I wanted people to answer my emails. I wanted people to take me seriously. And I thought it would be easier if people could put a face to my name. In retrospect, it was probably very hard to take a 25-year-old with dreams of being paid to play video games seriously. But I lusted for the idea. I wanted it more than I wanted the idea of 3 square meals a day. I wanted that to be my story. And I kind of screwed it up at first. If you're planning to take your life on the road, if you're worried about all the mistakes you might make, be assured of this at least. You'll probably not get it more wrong than I did. I was and still am rash, impulsive, hot-headed, prone towards headbutting challenges without first asking if there's a simpler solution. I'll sooner break down a door than test if it's unlocked. So when I decided to fly out to San Francisco, I emailed the only person I knew there, someone who I'd seen exactly one photo of, someone who knew he was the only person I knew there, someone who could have very well been a 52-year-old serial killer who wanted to upholster his furniture with my skin. And I asked him, "Could I sleep on your couch for a month?" He said yes, of course. I imagine a serial killer would have said the very same thing and then went away to sharpen his knives. But I got lucky, extremely lucky. The optimistic like to talk about how the population is predominantly good. But I'm personally of the opinion that people are only nice because they're not sure if they can get away with it. Yet, despite all that, I flew across the ocean and I went to the man's house, all without first taking the time to give my friends and family his personal information. Because clearly at 25 years old, I was an idiot who didn't know what it was like to die. But you do not have to leap into the jaws of danger. In fact, I highly recommend that you do not. Bad decisions make fantastic stories, but take it from someone who knows. The fun is in the retelling, not in the experience. If I could do things differently, If 25-year-old me had the same access to the Internet of Everything that present me does, I'd first ask her if she was out of her mind, and then tell her to check a website called Numia. I hesitate to call the website comprehensive. Like anything that relies on crowdsourced data, it suffers from the fact that only so many people are willing to take the time to answer questionnaires. But coupled with services like Nomadlist and crimereports.com, travel advisories and local forums, even the town's specific subreddit, Numia allows you to build an idea of the places you're visiting. It doesn't stop there. Airfare Watchdog and similar websites keep track of your desired flights, warning you of impending price drops and the reverse. Flights that warns you of the best time to be in an airport. There are even services to help you decide how best to maximize your frequent flyer miles. Keep going further down the rabbit hole, and you'll find websites like Sleeping Airports, which will provide the lowdown on where to sleep in the long layovers. Apps like Wi-Fox, which keeps you abreast of Wi-Fi passwords. Services like Lounge Connect and Flyer Talk, which allows you to connect with helpful strangers who might get you free access to first-class lounges. The list keeps going. And while busking in New York is an experience I wouldn't trade for anything in the world, I wish I knew all that sooner. Which just about brings me full circle. In the first draft of this talk, I wrote out the words "have a marketable skill." I thought about discussing the importance of having this one skill you can monetize, no matter where you go. But then I remembered my first months in New York, where the logistics of my next meal were becoming a source of daily concern. I had a degree in computer engineering. I could write. I could program. These were, according to everything I was told, incredibly marketable skills. But I was a stranger in a strange land, looking for a first big break in the games industry. One slowly discovering an unpleasant truth. When you're a foreigner from a developing third world nation, it is very hard to convince anyone to pay you to play video games. It's even harder to convince employers you're worth 6 months of paperwork. There are always fresh graduates who are more desperate, more easy to accommodate, more readily accessible than you. So I got creative. Throughout college and up until I became distracted with Muay Thai, I danced. I did ballroom Latin and belly dancing and more popping than reasonable. In New York, all that became useful in a way I hadn't expected. I fell in the company of a dance troupe in Union Square and spent 10 hours every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday dancing like I wasn't going to eat if I didn't give it my all. I hustled. I learned how to work a crowd, how to smile like I don't mean no harm, officer, how to differentiate between the cops that meant well and the ones that were looking to fill a quota. I figured out through trial and error how to hop subway cars as security tries to chase you down. Most importantly, I learned that marketable skills aren't halfway as important as knowing how to tell a story that will make people buy anything if you have to offer. If you want to live on the road, you should be able to make anything in business. If you want to tell stories, you should be able to make people listen. Dancing, singing, a love for fishing, rocket science, botany. It doesn't matter what your skill sets are. What matters is your ability to tell people, to make them believe with every tremble of your soul. It is worth their time and money. We're taught in schools that the world is made up of supply and demand. But the truth is this: if the demand doesn't exist, it just means you have to make it. Shame more than the lack of expertise, more than competition from your peers, more than a global economy shattered by political unrest, is your worst enemy here. Nothing comes to those who don't ask, because the world's waiting for you to convince it that it wants what you're selling. There is a script, even though no one likes admitting it exists. Busking taught me that there are at least 10 ways to get someone to separate with $10. If the door isn't open, go in through the window. And if that's not an option, well, it may be time to break down the walls. When you have a bucket in your hands and you're trying to get people to spare you some change, you're operating with finite resources, a set goal, a reluctant audience. You want their money. They won't keep moving. So you learn to iterate on what combination of eye contact and swagger, in your face, thanks for your time, spare some change, and could you help us out, works best on what members of the crowd. You learn not to take it personally, how to keep it going, how to repeat your song and dance until someone gives you what you want. Kind of like cold pitching, or asking for attention for a game, or insisting you're the best fit for a job that you know you don't have the right qualifications for. They're all stories to tell, stories to shape. But again, I digress. In general, I am of the opinion that our mistakes aren't so much a reason for embarrassment as they are the scaffolding of our NEMA. Even Silicon Valley startups entreat their employees to fail forward faster, and there is excellent reason for that. No education is superior to the one you earn the hard way. The bad stories, the one you're slightly ashamed about, those are your best teachers. For example, I learned the colloquial meaning of nightcaps when I, interested in only another glass of free bourbon, agreed to join a colleague for one. It was late, and we'd spent the evening in a group I'd stolen beer for. At that point, I was certain we were tight as thieves, the Five Musketeers. And besides, there was no way that a man who looked old enough to be my father would be interested in anything nefarious. So we went to his room, and he sat me down in an armchair. Then he dimmed the lights and began anxiously clearing the clutter from his bed. As I watched him fuss over his sheets, it dawned upon me exactly what kind of misunderstanding had taken place. I then did what anyone would do in that situation. I jumped to my feet, shouted I forgot my bag, ran out the door, and refused to ever speak to him again on the incident. Needless to say, I've never said yes to another nightcap again. But if there's anything I genuinely regret in the last 10 years, it's not taking advantage of the sharing economy or the resources available to digital nomads, a subculture I realized that I was a part of. If you're new to the idea of a transient lifestyle, you are absolutely spoiled for options. While you figure out how to monetize your passions, there is a veritable deluge of apps and websites designed to help you make a living. A hard one, regrettably. The gig economy benefits few outside the shareholders. Still, TaskRabbit permits you to make money off somebody else's laziness, move furniture, fold clothing, stand in line. These are all errands you can assign a price to. Similarly, there are services like Handy, Thumbtack, and Fancy Hands, which are more granular in nature, but no less viable and option for hard work. For those of you who can drive, are good with kids, or have a knack of animals, there is Uber, Sitter, and Rover. Or if you're genuinely desperate for food, sign up to be a mystery diner, a job I ideally wish I knew existed when I was 25 and very, very hungry all the time. In between, send your resumes out. Do everything you can. Google bristles with aggregators tailored for the digital nomad. Jobbatical, evergreen profits, remote co, working nomads, all to name a few. These keep tracks of positions that allow for remote workers. And for the first 4 months, I spent every weekend emailing a dozen editors, asking questions, 2 to 5 pitches attached to every introduction. Every email bereft of awkward reminders that they'd ignored my last 10 mails and the last 10 mails before that. Someone eventually caved. Later, I repeat the trick again in games writing with traditional publishing with my agent, who I DM'd instead of emailing a query and a book. I didn't wait for him to pass judgment on my work. I told him instead, I want you to be my agent. According to my agent, he looked up that day, looked at his boss, blinked and said, can she do that? Tell the world it wants what you're selling. Even if it's nothing but spectacle at first. Even if it's just smoke and mirrors and nothing but you wanting more that you have. If you decide one day to do like I did, except hopefully with a better sense of self-preservation, don't do it for money. Do it because of the stories. You're so uniquely positioned to go anywhere today, to do anything. Even if the world is writhing from political turmoil, it has so many resources, so many opportunities, so many avenues for you to just pick up and go. It has never been easier to decide, yes, I'm going to travel forever. So take that chance. Even if you don't decide to travel forever, even if you only decide to travel for a little while, take that chance. If you ever want to tell stories, if you want a perspective on the world like no one else might possess, if you ever want to grow in that unique way, take that chance and go see what the road has to show you. Do it because the cosmos is vast and we are tiny, and because travel has a way of reminding us that even though we don't last, hope and love and beauty will persist, regardless of what might happen. When I first learned that my father had passed away, the clock in my world stopped. It felt like someone had snapped the long hand and set the gears spinning all the wrong ways. Time became fluid. There were days when a minute felt like 2 weeks in solitaire, alone save for the voice inside my head, reminding me of all the should have dones and should have said's. And there were days that blurred to gray. Every moment made identical by the certainty that nothing will ever be okay again. Grief felt like holding my breath as my father drove his car through a tunnel, the promise of a wish dangling at the other end of the dark. If I just held on, if I could just outlast the ache in my lungs, if I could keep myself from screaming, even though my soul felt some days like just this one long unbroken howl, fate would give him back. I won't lie and tell you I remember much of what happened in those weeks. I remember demanding breakfast ice cream the morning it happened. Because goddamn, I will have breakfast ice cream on the day of my father's death, or there'll be hell to pay. I remember a friend kissing my forehead. And I remember white flowers from my publishers. And wondering if I'll ever be able to sleep without white noise again. If I'll ever let go of the breath I swallowed the morning my mother broke the news. When my wandering took me back to New York, when I finally sat down in Union Square, the city is so loud it was almost its own kind of silence. When I drank up Broadway in the sight of thousands, laughing and loving and living, with no knowledge of what I'd gone through. Something loosened in my chest. I never let go of that breath completely. Death is always with its price, and it won't let you move on until it has a piece of your innocence to wear in its hair. I still can't sleep unless I know there's somebody in the next room. I still can't go anywhere without the stuffed rabbit in my backpack. But I learned how to breathe again, how to feel my way through that pain in my chest. Sitting on a park bench in Union Square, I found myself reminded of the most basic of all platitudes. No matter what tragedy befalls you, what grief, someone somewhere has survived this. Nothing is unprecedented. There is a story. There is a script. There are lines older than us, archetypes printed into our very marrow. There is a denouement and ending to anguish, even if it doesn't look like you'll ever see it. And most vitally, that story is the way it was with everyone else who took its turn with it. Yours to deliver as you see fit. A friend of mine, Ursula Vernon, gave a speech several years ago when she won a literary award. In front of a captive crowd, she spoke about whale fall. She told them about how when a whale dies the right way, when it lets out its last breath above the abyssal depths, its body will fall into a dark that the sunlight will never touch. There, the body is picked clean by sharks and scavengers and creatures we don't have names for. When they've taken their pound of flesh, other kinds of life come. Zombie worms that burrow into the bones, to bloom like strange flowers. She talks about how many years the process takes, how bizarre it is, how intricate. In front of a crowd expecting her to go into length about something entirely different, she shows them why the death of a whale has a name. Then at the end, she explains how it all connects. It didn't. She just wanted to tell them a story about something marvelous in a way her audience would never forget. Which is, I guess, why I'm also here in front of a captive crowd, talking to you about my father's death. To quote Terry Pratchett, no one is actually dead until the ripples they cause die away. I have nothing of my father except for a photograph and a handful of fading memories. I talk about him every chance I get for that reason. The same reason why Ryan Green made That Dragon Cancer. So we're not the only ones with memories of those we lost. So the ripples find their way elsewhere, so they can stay alive just for a little longer. And besides, what better place to tell that story than here on the stage, in front of so many people who live and breathe the idea of narrative, who understand what it's like to have a story take root in their heart and feel the urge to spread it as far as it can go. Maybe that is the most important thing I learned in this last 10 years or so. Travel isn't just about seeing the world. Isn't about steeping yourself in its myriad cultures, hopeful it'll make your own writing more unique. It is about charting the continents of your own soul and mapping the borders that demarcates where you begin and where the world ends. It is about how we're defined by stories, how we're entirely stories, how we're parts of a living mythology, growing the tail of our species. Some days you're smaller, some days you're bigger. But you're always present, and while you live, there is not a single thing beyond your reach. And this is an incredibly short keynote. This is where I stop. Thank you.